Take the issue of the curriculum in the schools, in the public schools. Take the issue evil on the advice of the sitting president invaded and destroyed a good part of the simple of ruling and politics in this country, which is the capital. Who could have imagined that in the United States of America, where we're supposed to have law and order, where we're supposed to have an understanding that this country was built on a certain principles, that there is a big sector of the society calling for a man to rule almost by decree, that he is the president and we want someone to be a strong president. What does that supposed to mean? They are looking for some kind of a dictatorship. And this is not new, by the way, but the size of it is big. I remember after the events of September 11, Ashcroft, who was the Attorney General, drafted new laws and brought it to the Congress, to his own party, the Republicans. And when they looked at it, I said, are you drugs on drugs? Are you high? Are you, what's wrong with you? That law that he proposes called for the American government to arrest any US citizen for no reason for a month. Keep him for a month and then decide what you want to do with him. That was supposed to be the proposed law that the government of George Bush the son proposed. And of course, the Congress and women from the Republican Party, they knew that this would be absolutely a no, and there'll be a revolt in this country. Because the concept of freedom and your rights and all this sometimes, being practiced, and sometimes you can see it as utter nonsense. This was supposed to be there. And the game continues where basically, people have a choice. Elect your own, whatever you choose of the president. But by the way, you have a choice between two. And those two are approved by the establishment, the elites. If you want to call it the deep state. So when that law came, it was a shock that someone is willing to go that far. But we are seeing about 70 million Americans who have voted to Trump in the last election indicates that what is coming and where things will go. Where things will go. So we will be, inshallah, shedding some light as time goes on in this series on this issue. At the same time, the Islamic concepts that are absent, not just from our children, but even from the parents. I remember once giving a khutbah here about how Islam valued life. And this brother come after Salah, he said, what is it that you are saying? Quran call upon the Muslim to kill all the Christians and the Jews. Now this brother in his early 50s or late 40s. I said, what? What? This is an immigrant, a parent. I said, what? He said, Islam call upon the Muslims. This is in the Quran here. This is in the Quran. I said, what Quran? Not the Quran that I have. Now I realized the issue when he told me, my colleague at work, who's a non-Muslim, he's the one who showed him the verses. I realized immediately that I cannot reason with him based on the Quran or what the Quran says. So I shifted the discussion. I asked him, where are you from? Of course, from his language, I knew where he's from. He's from Egypt, from the Gib, right? Gad. I knew from Egypt. He said, I am from Egypt. I said, okay. How many Coptic Christians are in Egypt today? He said, there are millions. I said, okay. How long they have been living in Egypt? He's saying from the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I said, why didn't the Muslims for the last 1400 years kill them? No, he was taken back. He said, as if you just opened his eyes to something which is obvious. I said, where is the two most holiest churches in the world? The Church of Nativity, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Looks like he did not know the English. I told him it's in Jerusalem and Beit Lahem. The Church of Nativity, East al-Mahd, is where they think Isa alayhi salam was born. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is in Jerusalem, where they think his tomb is. I said, of course, we believe that Isa alayhi salam was not killed, crucified. I said, those two churches have been under the Muslim rule for about 1200 years of the 1400 years past. And they have been honored and protected. In fact, the keys to Kanisat al-Qiyamah are in the hands of a Muslim. The holiest church in the world. There was a program on public TV on this aspect. There was a program on public TV. Basically, this place is so holy to the Christians that they fight on every stairs, on every corner of the church. So let's say the Catholic have this corner, the Coptic Church have that corner, the Ethiopian Church Orthodox, they have that corner. And they fight on every small thing. If they want to do something for maintenance, they will fight with hands and beat each other. So 300 years ago, they could not agree who will have the key of the church. So the Muslim ruler then at that locality, he said, how about if we give it to the family of Nusayba? There's a family, very well-known family in Palestine and Jerusalem, called the Nusayba family. We call it Nusayba. But they are the Nusayba family. From that point on, believe it or not, each day, one of the members of the Nusayba family comes and opens the church in the morning and come and close it in the evening. When Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, because I want to bring the issue of tolerance. When Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu entered Jerusalem without shedding a single blood. And the time of Asr came. And the Patriarch of Jerusalem, who handed him the keys, he said, Sayyidina Umar, it's time for Asr prayer. And what did Sayyidina Umar say? Look, this is Sayyidina Umar, who was the bully of Mecca, who have no ideas, who have no intellectual level to discuss any issue with anyone. But as the poet said, أنجزت للدين والدنيا قياصرة بالأمس كانوا رعاء الشاة والنعم. رعاء الشاة والنعم. Oh Muhammad, you have brought to humanity rulers, khulafa, leaders, who yesterday were shepherds of sheep and camels. And this is Umar. So the Patriarch said, why not? Why not pray inside the church? He said, I do not want one day the Muslims to come and say, Umar prayed in this church, it's ours. Look, this is Islam. And he chose to go a few hundred feet away and do his salah. If you visit the Quds, Jerusalem, there's a small masjid next to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's called Masjid Umar. Masjid Umar. Of course, there's a misnomer in some of the media that's there, or social media, or some of the cards. They bring the picture of the dome of the rock and said Masjid Umar, which is not the case. But in front of Masjid Umar, when I stand, wallahi, I had tears. Because in the front of Masjid Umar, radiallahu anhu, there is the agreement that was done between Umar radiallahu anhu and the Patriarch, and signed by Sayyidina Sharhabil ibn Hassan. And other than also Ikrimah, the son of, who's Ikrimah, the son of who? Abu Jahl, and the other leaders. You see it, it's written, and it just shakes you. Now, when the Crusaders came and took over Jerusalem, what happened to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa? It became the house for their horses. Stand for their horses. That's what they did with Masjid Al-Aqsa. And they spilled so much blood that the Westerners themselves talk about that the city of Jerusalem, what we call the old city, blood was so much that the khuyul, the horses, have blood for, until their knees in some areas. So Sayyidina Umar entered Jerusalem, nothing. You have the Aman. Sayyidina Salah ad-Din, also when he entered Jerusalem, what did he tell the people there? I live under Islam, ahlan wa sahlan. If you want to leave, go ahead and take your property and leave. Take your property and leave. So when we discuss some aspect of the Islamic civilization, basically starting with this concept of tolerance. Now the concept of tolerance, unfortunately, in some countries in the Muslim world, the Gulf, is being used to say we need to accept the Zionists in Palestine. We need to have all sort of interchanges and even military cooperation and cultural cooperation and all of this, that Islam is the deen of tolerance. Wow. You see how the concepts are upside down? But what is the most powerful aspect of this is 1400 years ago, and this is, by the way, just show you that Islam is the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this is not human made. This is one aspect of it. Of course, the mu'jiz is the Quran. What had happened is that this deen that is solely based on the Islamic aqidah, based on Tawheed, and out of the Tawheed came all those laws. Islam comes from day one and says, if you want to live under the Islamic state, under the Islamic society, you are welcome. You have your space. You have your space. Unfortunately, many Muslims now say, look, in America they accept us all. But look at about 300 years ago in England. If you are not on the deen of the king, you could be killed. And 1400 years ago, Islam says, if you do not believe in Islam, you have your space. And take Palestine as an example. For 1 or 2 generations, the bulk of the people in Palestine were non-Muslims. And eventually, they accepted Islam. Without force. Without forcing anyone. Because you cannot force anyone to become a Muslim. That's what the Quran says, La ikraha fid-din. La ikraha fid-din. So with this concept of tolerance comes, this is only one aspect that we can discuss at length. But you do not appreciate it until you know what was in Europe only 300 years ago, if you do not agree with the deen of the king. Not just that. Islam says, marry, divorce, inheritance, according to your deen, according to whatever rules. This was 1400 years ago. In where? In Mecca, in Medina, in the middle of nowhere. Just to show you that this deen from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came to be there till the day of judgment. This concept is one of many that Sayyidina Abu al-Hasan Nadawi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless his soul, he wrote in a book, ماذا خسر العالم بانحطاط المسلمين. Remind you, this is an Indian scholar. What did the world lose when the Muslims fell back and became backward. Because when the message of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came, it was so powerful that we need to appreciate and understand what was before to understand what was after. Islam came, embraced, for example, on the issue of equality. Huh? All the humans are the son of Adam, Eve, almost are the same. We came from the dust of the earth. And when one of the Sahaba told Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, and he was Arab, when he uttered this statement to have some remaining some arrogance in him, he said, "You are a son of a black mother." And the Prophet ﷺ looked at him. He said, "You are a man that have Jahiliyyah in him." Wow. The word Jahiliyyah, of course, would shake the foundation of any new believer. That you still, and what did he do? He said, "Bilal, please come and step on my face." He put his face to the ground and asked Bilal to bring his shoes and put it on his face. Because he realized he had a problem. Now, why do I bring this aspect? Because when we discuss the issue with the Muslims, with the Ummah, we are not discussing just the Ummah, we are discussing ourselves. I mean, I hear a statement with, "I am Pakistani first." Maybe he will say, even I'm a Pashtun first, and Pakistani second, and Muslim third. Believe me, this is in almost every one of us. Palestinian, inshallah. I am this, I am that. When the poet taught us what the Quran taught us, أبي الإسلام لا أبا لي سواه إذا افتخروا بقيس أو تميم. My father is Islam, I don't have another father. When the people are proud of being from this tribe or that tribe. Why? Because if we do not know what this deen is all about, how we can maintain an Islamic identity for us and our children in this country? How? How? Now, I was raised until high school in Palestine. Alhamdulillah, I was, ahead of the class in many classes. Take the Deen, for example, Tarbiyah Deeniyah, and it was in the Palestine one of the best at the time. I will tell you, only at age 16, after going through this curriculum for so many years, I realized that this thing is for our life to be implemented. All along, yeah, alhamdulillah, I started making salah at age 6 or 7 at that time, but mostly, going to the masjid when the time they were all elders above age 60. We were about 6 or 7 of us. But there was no clue of what this deen about until I went one day to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa on Friday. And I was standing outside. I was in high school. And there was some university student. You see, that's where the university students come on the high schools. And one of them was saying, I need to move out because my brother is getting married and I have to leave. So I asked him, why do you have to leave? He said, this lady is not a mahram to me. And he started talking as if he's talking in English. I said, what do you mean mahram? I mean, I had no clue going through until high school, studying all of this Islam, that this is a system, a way of life that came to be implemented and put in our lives and in the life of the Ummah. We have studied the history of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Ali, Al-Hussein, Al-Hassan radiallahu anhu. We had no clue that, this is something that we have to have. That it's absent because Islam was never taught in this way. This is one aspect of what we will discuss in those classes, inshallah. The other aspect which I'll spend the next 15 minutes on it, is to discuss the issue of the reality in this country and overseas. You see, when we read the news, unfortunately, the bulk of our time these days I spend on social media to read and see videos. The bulk of them is a waste of time, and bulk of them is nonsense. This applies to the majority, not to all. But we need to understand what is happening. The truth is somewhere. You need to dig for this truth. I'll give you an example. In 1994, there was something called Rwandan genocide. How many of you have heard of the Rwandan genocide? 1, 2, 3. Oh, mashallah, there were 10 of you. Great. So what happened in the Rwandan genocide is a minority ethnic group in Rwanda called Tutsis were slaughtered by the majority Hutus. And according to the estimate that are there, you can check it, they said 800,000 people were killed in 100 days. Now, who's responsible? Who's supporting this? You read the media, you hear the officials. Even at that time, the US representative to the United Nations, she talks about the subject, but she goes around it. Because no one wants to say the French are responsible for this. No one wants to say it. Well, it was only 2 years ago that France came and said, we are guilty. The government officially said, we are guilty of what had happened. Well, after what? 30 years or so. Although the truth is there, but there's an agreement among the Western countries. I'll cover you, you cover me. Now, if you think that our countries are free, and the Muslim countries, think again. I would say, with the very few exceptions of Turkey and now Pakistan, since they disengaged from the US and says we are on China's side, none of those countries have their say. I'll give you an example. How many crises do we have now in our own countries? There's a possibility of a war between Algeria and Morocco. Imagine. What had happened? Well, Algeria has access to the Mediterranean, but they do not have access to the ocean. Morocco have access to both. So there's something called the Sahara, Western Sahara, Sahara al-Gharbi. And Algeria has been supporting rebels in there for many years to try to have access to the ocean. And Morocco have been fighting them. Morocco claims about 80% of the land, and the Polisario group claimed 20%. Suddenly comes Donald Trump to recognize and establish normal relationship with the Zionists in Palestine. I'll give you the Western Sahara. What? Who are you? This is your father's land? Did you inherit this land? I mean, this land is part of the Muslim land. How could be one person? I mean, the US have a policy for many, many years of negotiation need to be done between the Morocco, Algeria, and the Polisario to settle this. Suddenly, one person, because he has the control. We do not have control over our resources. We can't. He comes then and says, from now on, the Golan Heights is not Syrian, it's Israeli. Yes, just with us. Jerusalem is the capital of the Zionists. And you think that he's only repeating what had happened 100 years ago, when the borders between the Muslim countries were divided by the colonialists. Kuwait and Saudi, until today, they have issues with the borders, because some British diplomat sitting on a chair sipping some coffee, drew a line in the desert and said, this is Kuwait and this is Saudi. Those are the borders. We have seen with our own eyes, those who were born then, so we were not, when the US had a trap for Saddam to enter Kuwait. They told him basically, through their ambassador, we do not really get involved in relations between you guys. Within a few days, the Iraqi army just went through Kuwait and take a few days to take the whole thing. I mean, it just took the distance, just to drive. Just to drive. And suddenly the US put 500,000 soldiers and drive them out, saying basically, wait a minute, Kuwaiti oil belongs to us, not to you. Because that's the game. Who controls the resources? Who controls the resources? How can it be that a country like Iraq, so rich in oil, that the president says, this is the president of Iraq, $124 billion were smuggled out of Iraq by the gang and the officials in the government. This is the president of Iraq. This is not a Western or an Eastern journalist. 124 billions, according to their record, smuggled out of Iraq, and they are in banks in Europe and the US. We have seen the US invasion of Afghanistan. And the story of Afghanistan, one day we will touch on it. Do you know that Afghanistan have been in war for the last 50 years? In 1979, the US made a trap for the Russia to invade Afghanistan by staging a coup by a fake communist. And for those who would like to read more about fake communists, read Ustad Muhammad Qutb, Allah yarhamu, book Waqa'na al-Mu'asir, how the US had some fake communists working for it. Hafizullah Amin was one of them. So Hafizullah Amin got rid of the real communists and took over. It did not take a few days when the Russian army invaded. And the first thing that they did in Afghanistan, go to the palace and kill the communists, supposedly Hafizullah Amin. And for the next 10 years, Afghanistan had been in war. Hundreds of thousands were killed, millions were out, and this and this and that. And then come later the US invasion. 20 years of suffering. And some stupid, journalist here, he said, how in the world that the people of Afghanistan mostly still support Taliban? Because for the last 50 years they did not have what the Prophet ﷺ said. If you have safety at your home, if you have safety, if you are at your home and you have safety, إن كان آمنا في سربه معافى في بدنه, good health, and you have the food, you have the whole dunya. Imagine Afghanistan in the countryside for the last 50 years, with the exception of maybe 5 or 6. 50 years that is. Nobody in the countryside have the ability to go and sleep with it, because anytime, even in the old days or few years back, an American soldier or a Russian soldier or one of their tools agents will knock on your door, get inside your door, go through your stuff, and take it. Many of you know sometimes some of the things are clear, but the truth is there when you read the media. A brother was telling me that, this brother, he was telling me, I was studying political science, and the teacher said, read those resources, 6 or 7 of them, for the same story, and you will see different angles. Different angles. Just take the story of the Sudan, for example. What's going on in the Sudan? And what would be the potential between Morocco and Algeria? What's happening in Ethiopia now? It's a matter of days before the Ethiopian government is overthrown. Remember, there are 30% of the Ethiopians are Muslims. And more than 30 years ago, a minority in Ethiopia allied themselves with the Eritrean. You hear, I'm sure you heard of the Tigray people. The Tigray people that the government have attacked, they are 5% of the people. They went, took over the country, slaughtered many people. And being the minority, they control the country for 30 years. And then we have this Abiy Ahmed comes, who was not a Muslim, by the way. He's an Orthodox Christian, but he was adopted by a Muslim family. Huh?
His father was.
Well, according to what I read, his adopted father was a Muslim, not the actual father. But that's basically if you read his biography. Anyway, so Abiy Ahmed comes and decides after many years, I'm going to have peace with Eritrea. Suddenly, he's getting Nobel Peace Prize for him, and so on and so forth. And there were some issues with the Tagara people, and he decided to attack them. And he did a fatal mistake, basically splitting his army to two. One, to prevent Sudan from supporting it, so he split the army. The Tigerians initially were defeated badly, but they came back, and believe it or not, they are marching toward the Addis Ababa. And they are saying it's a matter of days before the whole thing collapses. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save, because we could, Africa has all those massacres. So when you look around and see who's playing with these things, you will find the hands of the Westerners. And starting now, in the past few years, China and Russia are putting their nose there. So to think that we are free, and as Muslims, that's not the case. And it's by design. You will need to look at what's going in the events. But what really struck you is how things now are upside down. I'll give you an example. I saw a video of President Abbas. He was talking with a broken heart. There's this Israeli soldier who was captured by Hamas. He said he had been suffering. And his family had been suffering for a long time. They did not see their son. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. He's talking about an Israeli soldier, a criminal in Palestine, who have been killing children just like the rest of them. And he's crying that he's away from his family and this and that. Guess who is this man? He is the president of an authority that killed people inside the jails. Sheikh Omar Barghouti, he had a drill. They drilled it in his bones, and they gave it to the family after they killed him. What's his crime? Oh, he's an imam of masjid from Hamas. And recently, some of you are aware of, 25 of their Zabaniya, their criminals, they go to the house of someone who's an outspoken critic of Hussein al-Sheikh. He's one of the leaders of the authority. 25 people, they go on one person, and they keep beating him. They keep beating him until he is dead. This is the same president. He's crying on a Jewish soldier and having many people are in his own jails. Forget about the jails. That's, in fact, the other day I really had a hard time when a brother asked me, what's the difference between Hamas and Al-Fatah? I was lost to what to say. But basically, we as Muslims, we need to be aware of our surrounding here, our Muslim Ummah there. Remember that the Muslims, I will close with this, that even when they lived in Mecca, in the early days of Islam, they were well aware of what's happening between the Persians and the Romans. So when the verse was revealed غلبت الروم في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون. The Roman earth was by the Persians, but they will come back in a few years and defeat them. When I came here, I looked at that incident in history. The scholars said that the Romans defeated so badly, there was no hope that they're going to come back. And the Muslims, of course, were devastated because the people of, the Romans, at least they had some faith, Christians, compared with the others, Persians who worship fire. So the kuffar of Mecca were very heavy. And the Quran was revealed that on that day the Muslims were joyous. Of course, some of the scholars of Rasul said on that day it was also the Battle of Badr. But that's another issue. But the point is, awareness was there. Go to Habasha, there's a king that is just. Those are not revelation, those are understanding of the reality. When someone comes to Medina, oh, he's from the people of Afar. Well, I said 940, so we will stop here, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, barakallah fikum. Any question, any comment? Inshallah, we'll try to tackle it, inshallah. Yes? Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I can't hear you, sister.
I said, I understand, you're right, we are Muslim first, and where we come from is second. But what I want to say is this, there are many people who are told not to talk to the people of color when they come to this country.
They're told not to mix with the people of color. They're told not to talk to us. When they get in trouble, I have said Salaam Alaikum to some of the sisters. They look me up and down. They don't know. They don't have to know. They just know I'm Muslim. Oh, my father's Egyptian and my mother's Jamaican. But they don't have to know that. What I feel sad about is the same people who look us in our face and walk by us. And when they get in trouble, a woman cried her eyes out. My son, the FBI picked him up, and all of a sudden I was her sister. I'm the same woman that was Assalamu Alaikum, the Sabti. There are many, many people who look just like me who served in the military. They served, but for us to have the right to criticize the government if we want to or not. And the people who are coming, when you come, like you said, you came, you're immigrant, you came, you're enjoying the rights that my father's people, my sisters and brothers, my uncles, they fought for and lost their lives. Those who did not fight in the military, they were hung from trees because they spoke out against injustices. I would just like to say that I think people should remember that as well, that the same people you pass by and don't say Salaam Alaikum or acknowledge as your brother is the one, they've got a history, they've got a story to tell too. And you should remember that when you go to the store and the people say Salaam Alaikum and you act like you don't want to be recognized as Muslim. I just feel sad that all of this is happening, and it says that in the Quran about people, this will be a time when people won't even say Salaam Alaikum unless they know you. But what do they have to know other than I have hijab, I say Assalamu Alaikum. The people who are non-Muslim, they can't do enough for me. The brothers hold the doors. The sisters ask me, do I need help with my bags? The same brothers who say Assalamu Alaikum to you are the ones who will step over me when I drop something. So I understand where you're going with this, but I also hope and pray that you also talk about manners, behavior, adab, about how we should behave, not just that we should recognize we're Muslims, but how we should behave to our brothers and sisters. Because there are many people who came before me who lost their lives because they spoke up about injustices, about how people were treated. It's not just immigrants. It's people who were brought here against their will. I'm talking about people that were dragged in the bellies of ships across oceans that they knew nothing about. those people. We have to remember those people too, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, sister. As I mentioned in my introduction, I mentioned the three brothers who are indigenous. I said this class will be not just taught by myself. I mentioned among the people that I mentioned, three indigenous brothers, members of this community, African Americans, that we will need to hear from them. Because what you are saying is absolutely right. I do have an issue with this military service because basically military service, what did they do to the Muslim land? They obliterated and devastated the Muslim countries. But yeah, I mean, they said we fought for freedom here. That's another issue that we will tackle. But what the sister is saying, there is absolutely a sickness within our community. Absolutely, there is a sickness. There is a sickness within our community in the USA where some aspect of arrogance, where we look at people from high, unless, as the sister said, you need them for something. Now, what I want to mention, sister, this is not only pertaining to the indigenous African Americans. Believe me. In the way that we treat each other. People from the Gulf and people who are not from the Gulf. People from Egypt versus people from the Sudan. Morocco versus Algeria. And that's why I said we are not talking about just the problems we will tackle that the Ummah. No, the Islamic concept of brotherhood, one of the main concepts, we talked about tolerance. One of the main concepts is the issue of brotherhood. Islam came and says, look, your brother is the brother in the Aqidah. In the Aqidah. And the Quran is clear. قل إن كان آباؤكم وأبناؤكم, if your relatives, if your buddies, if your tribe is beloved to you more than Allah and the Prophet and the cause of jihad and this and that, then wait for something that will not be good. However, let me mention this. In the old days, we used to visit community members. Sheikh Abu Yusuf, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him and cure him, and Brother Sami Abdul Baqi and myself. We used to visit community members. So basically we will just tell brother, for example, Brother Ali Umar, can you gather the Somalis for us? Brother Fayyaz, can you gather the Hyderabadis for us? Brother Mustafa, can you gather the Palestinians for us? To visit different sectors of the Muslim community. And one day we met with the indigenous African American community. And a brother was feeling so bad. He said, racism is inside our masjid. I said, how? I mean, there were others sitting. He said, I keep pushing my foot next to the brother from India and Pakistan who is next to me, and I push my foot toward him, and he pushed his foot away. And there was another brother sitting indigenous, also he nodded that this is happening to me. I said, well, wait a minute. Yeah, there is racism, there are issues, but this is not an issue of racism. The brothers think that you need more space. You see how Shaitan came? The brother think you are pushing your foot toward him. He think you need more space, so he pulled away. So yeah, there is a problem, but at the same time, we want to take it in perspective. That's not all what we think. Not all what we think is reality, because sometimes we just think something had happened. For example, you come to the masjid and you said, I gave salam to the brother and he did not return the salam. Well, if you come to me, I'll tell you, he cannot hear. I know him. He cannot hear. Unless you come in front of him, wave you, Assalamu alaikum, wave, he cannot hear you. So yeah, there are definitely, sister, absolutely, there is this problem within us, but believe me, it is much more deeper than what you think. It's not against indigenous or African Americans. It's much more widespread. I'm just telling you, in Palestine, where I came from, there are tribes still mentality. Not the tribes in the sense of Saudi Arabia, and no, but the mentality is there. That I am from this so and so family. And if you would approach them saying, my son is interested in your daughter, what? You look at like this. What? Are you serious? Your son? I'm talking my daughter. I mean, some of them cannot hide it. Some of them, of course, more political. Yeah, brother, but her cousin already talked about it. Although her cousin did not talk about it. But just go. So that's why when we started, I said it's not the problem that we just say that the Ummah needs fixing. We need fixing. We need fixing. You could easily instigate a fight in a masjid between two ethnicities or between two countries. And this is the sickness that we have. And we are transferring it to our kids. We are transferring it to our kids. But the reality is, yes, there is a story here. And we need to understand our indigenous brothers and sisters, because they are the people who have given up on their own culture when they saw the Nur of Islam, and they have sacrificed double sacrifice, because they are looked, at because they are African American, and then come, and he's a Muslim too. He's a Muslim too. So this add to it. And inshallah, as I mentioned, this class is not really intended to talk about the adab and akhlaq, because the imams, mashallah, tackle these issues in Jum'ah. It's a different angle, a different taste. But once in a while, we will just remind ourselves of the sickness that is in our minds and in our hearts. And Rasulullah ﷺ said, a person who have a tiny part of kibr, arrogance, look down at people, he will not smell the rih of Jannah, he will not enter Jannah. And believe me, in many of us, وَلَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي, because the way that we were raised. Our family saying, we are from this family. We are from this family. We are from that family. This is the way that we are raised. Because Islam was not the basic principle that formulate our thought. Quick question or comments before we go? Jazakumullahu khair. Wa barakallahu feekum. We'll see you inshallah next Thursday. Bi'idhnillah Samir Alim. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, your families. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, our children, Islam and the Muslims in this country and all over. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate the difficulties on our brothers and sisters here and in Afghanistan and beyond. Ya Rabbil Alameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك. I would need to thank Brother Hamza Ansari for all what he did for this class. Jazakallah khairan. And Brother Yusuf, bless you inshallah, your family, and Brother Muhammad.
I want to hear it. Huh? Is that just something else?
Yeah, that's awesome because you have a lot of athletes.
You know the president's on? I never.
Wow. No, it's not. It's Hamza's.
What are you gay?
Yeah, I know.
Hey, yo, just say what's up. Hey, yo,
Should I end the stream?